My name's Nadine Flood. I'm the National Secretary of the Community and Public Sector Union, and we represent the people who work for the Department of Human Services, including in Centrelink Medicare and Child Support. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge their leadership and custodianship always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So, let's talk about robo-debt. Well, I want to start with saying something about what it's like representing the people who do this work. The people who do this work are generally working mums, most of them working class women in a lot of outer metropolitan and regional communities around the country where a job working for Centrelink is actually a decent job. It's a decent job particularly if you're a woman. If you don't have a teaching or a nursing qualification, it was a secure job with flexibility, with decent rights and conditions, and frankly, a lot better than working in retail or hospitality. And so for a lot of those women, they and their families actually share a lot in common with the clients on the other side of the counter. And of course, there's a range of people who work for human services, and there's a big office in Canberra, and there's a lot more people there who've got university degrees, and their salaries tend to be quite a bit higher as well, and they had a little bit more to do with the design of what we call robo-debt, despite the Secretary of that department having explicitly written to the CPSU saying, could we please not use the following words, to which we promptly used all of the following words all the time. Hey, it's the small things sometimes that give your members a boost. So in the view of many of the people we represent, our social security system and working for it was something they used to be proud of. They see it as a key part of a compassionate and democratic society, and that having not just a safety net, but a system that actually copes with the complexities of life, with the real disadvantage and vulnerabilities in our community, is an extraordinarily important part of what it means to be a decent society. Well, the reality now is so much different. It frankly has become an Orwellian nightmare. And it's a very, very difficult system for the people who are subject to it, but also for the people who work in it. So for those pulled into robo-debt, we have elderly, vulnerable, unemployed, disadvantaged people being pursued for money that they often do not owe, and even if they do owe, don't have a capacity to pay because of the complexity of their lives. Once they're dragged into this struggle, they have struggled to find a way out. And it's no surprise, and that is actually no accident. It is no accident that the Department of Human Services now has 5,000 less staff than 5 years ago, and that 36 million calls to Centrelink went unanswered last year. 36 million. Because this is not a government that actually believes in resourcing and delivering a decent social security system, and I've said this on a number of occasions, and I said it to the Robo-Debt Senate inquiry, Labor must take some of the blame with their cuts and efficiency dividends having actually triggered many of the first of these rounds of job cuts that have just got worse under the coalition in government. So clients are not the only victim of this fairly profound change in what these services do. It is also having a big impact on the staff who are actually trying to help these people. And I want to say a little bit about what's actually occurred. Until the recent introduction of the automated debt recovery process, Centrelink and DHS staff played a very hands-on role in compliance. It wasn't a perfect role, but it was a role where, for example, there were staff who, if the data that you had from the ATO from different employers didn't match what you were claiming, what they actually did was contact those employers who have a legal obligation to keep pay records and say, well, does this match or doesn't it? Now, what they would often find, particularly as work in our economy is becoming more fragmented, is that the difference between Tax Office and DHS records could be as simple as one calls them RH Labour Hire and the other calls them RH Labour Hire Proprietary Limited, and a third one says that it's actually Richard Holland's Labour Hire. There is no debt, there is no fraud. There are simply a range of different records over a period of time. So in fact, in the estimation of our members, and we put this forward to the Senate inquiry, our estimate is that it's far, far more than 20% of people who don't have a valid debt. Far more. For a lot of people, it's actually a data matching issue. There's a whole range of complexities to the system, and I'm not going to go through them. But the fundamental removal of human oversight, of people actually having an active role to ensure that the system gets it right, that government gets its data right before it goes after people who are receiving or have received payments, is a really profound change. And it is absolutely gut-wrenching for the staff in these areas, including the other part of the disaster of DHS, which is there are now 4,500 casual and what's called irregular and intermittent staff. Apparently, Australia now only offers social security irregularly and intermittently. We haven't quite worked out on which days and which times that is supposed to be available to people, but when we do, we'll let you know. So 4,500 of those staff whose role is often to change the call stats by clicking you through to a different queue, which is why they say their phone calls are answered in 12 or 14 minutes. Because that's how long you might spend on one queue before you get clicked through the next. The fact that there isn't a real human who answers your call for 90 minutes would be how most people define answering the phone. So when I say Orwellian, it is simply bizarre. And, you know, read and watch some of the Senate inquiry transcript if you really want to become a robo-debt nerd, because it is wacky. So we have had our members in Centrelink and DHS actively raising issues about this before the program was put in place. As immediately the program was put in place, we've had whistleblowers come forward. It's a bit of a scary place to work, and they do go after our union delegates and their staff. Taking that one on as well. And putting information forward into particularly the Senate inquiry process, but also other processes, as well as the alliance work we've done as a union with ACOS, the Welfare Rights Centre, Unemployed Workers Union, range of other organisations. So there are a whole range of issues around what's happened to people, and I'm happy to answer questions on those. I don't profess to be a robo-debt nerd. But I think the fundamental concern here is that government has made it so much harder to get access to those things that are actually supposed to be provided, that it is actually quite and absolutely deliberate. And, you know, our previous speaker referred to some of the history on this and the oversight on this. When the budget came out recently, and the budget had further decisions on robo-debt, and there's further changes ahead, you know, we did a lot of alliance work around the budget. We had what was called a People's Budget session, where people from over 70 organisations came together and talked about, you know, what our concerns were before the budget, and then worked together afterwards. And it's really striking, I guess, being in those forums to me, and there was a couple of people who were unemployed people who are advocates for themselves and for the Unemployed Workers Union, who were talking about, you know, there are simply so many more people who don't have jobs than there are jobs in this economy, and yet we have a system that seems to be set up to make it so difficult, so humiliating to engage with. So for our members, that has had an impact which is less profound because they do have jobs, but we have seen increased stress levels, sick leave, depression, and of course, and not unsurprisingly, increased aggression from clients. At the current level of resources, Centrelink and DHS have a record level of client aggression, including, I believe, last year over 7,000 separate incidents, and more than 1,000 times the police were called to officers. It's a disaster area. It's actually, there are a number of DHS and Centrelink offices that, you know, in our members, you're actually quite unsafe places for people to go into. And that's not what a wealthy country with a decent social security system should be providing. So In addition to those things, I guess it's worth looking at some of the root causes. In our view, the funding cuts are a key driver of the way this department and other departments are going, and particularly the move to push people online. We have never had any objection to digital transformation in the public sector where the community can actually engage more effectively with government services, not have to provide the same information 10 times, be able to navigate services more easily, and actually be able to do things on mobile devices and make those things easier. But that's actually got to be about making those things easier for people to engage with services, and it's got to be backed up with having permanent trained staff who can do the work and deal with people who can't navigate those systems. You've also got to fund the systems. DHS and Centrelink is one of 2 major organisations in the world still operating on a very outdated platform that neither this or the previous government has chosen to fund the replacement of. Guess what the other one is? The Pentagon. I have to say that scares the heck out of me. You know, I hope they're not using it for anything important, but seriously, that is a little bit freaky. So, the Pentagon. So, the cuts that have occurred have come through 3 things: across the board cuts to all public service agencies, specific cuts from generally thought up from the Department of Finance about stuff that they reckon could just be cheaper. Generally they're wrong. And the so-called service delivery reform savings, where government says lots of people will go online, so we need less humans and it'll all work really well, and so we'll take the money out up front. And this is the stuff that has actually driven the decisions behind online compliance and robo-debt, but also a whole range of other decisions about trying to move people off the disability supports pension, the welfare to work system, what's happening with CDP. I mean, there is a whole direction here right across the system, and it is consistent. So they're classic false economies, and they are very ugly for people, and they're getting uglier in an economy where people are actually struggling more. We're really concerned about what's going to happen next with pensioners and older people who rely on support. And I did just want to reflect briefly on that. From the 1st of July, the OCI program will be expanded, and it will include data from the tax office about pensioners' interest earnings and asset values. And evidence from the Secretary of Human Services, Catherine Campbell, to the Senate inquiry, while she has said that pensioners process will involve manual checking, it's not at all clear what that means, and in our view, there simply just aren't enough staff left to do it. So there are real concerns, and concerns that government continues to say this system is working fine, there really isn't a problem, while that is not the experience of either people subject to the system or working within it. They did make some adjustments to robo-debt. So, for example, they've stopped asking people to repay debts if they've just asked for a review. There's a few other small things, but they're fairly minor, and frankly, a lot of it was spin. The fundamental issues in the views of our members are unresolved. The human oversight of actually having trained staff who do this work, who can make sure that they get it right, is a real concern, and the government maintains they don't have to restore that. The service standards, the service standards are gamed all the time, which is why we have these bizarre things about how long the core wait times are and so on. Minister Tudge claimed last week, he said, look, there's an issue with service standards, but that can be resolved by pushing more people online. And actually, we're going to outsource some of the call centres to a private contractor. So the only 250 extra jobs they put into DHS in the budget was to contract out some of our members' jobs. They also cut another 1,188 jobs out of an agency that's lost 5,000. Now, I got out of the budget lockup at 7:30. 7:36, I got the first text from one of our rank and file leaders in DHS. And, she just said to me, Nadine, I can't see how they can do this. Like, we can't survive now. How on earth can they pull another 1,200 people out of the system? She didn't actually say how on earth, but I am being videoed, so I might not use the language she did use. because she's sticking it up on Facebook after. And let me tell you, the department watches these things. So, it's gut-wrenching. Those service standards are problematic. The lack of real people doing the work is real problematic. And, the government and the department has refused to acknowledge that cutting 5,000 jobs has had anything to do with what a disaster Centrelink is, which is sort of again surreal. So we have been doing a whole range of things, and I brought along some flyers for our Proud to be Public campaign site, where we're doing things on DHS and RoboDebt at the moment. Our members have been campaigning politically and in the community. They are doing political activity right now, trying to, target particular government MPs who may be more concerned and seeking to actually push them on these issues. But of course, at the same time as they deal with RoboDebt, they are involved in a 3.5-year industrial dispute where for the last 3.5 years government has been attacking their rights, conditions and pay, and members in DHS have been on strike up to 28 times. So it's been a little bit difficult. So, look, we're up for these fights. I don't have a lot of confidence that government is going to move on these things at this point, but I think there is an enormous imperative for all of us to think through and work together on, over the next 12 to 18 months, there is an opportunity in communities around the country, particularly in regional communities and in marginal seats, to actually say, this system doesn't work, people are out of work, this economy's struggling, you're pulling jobs out of public services at the same time jobs are going out of everywhere, and if you do not do something about it, we are going to punish you, and we are going to punish you where you care about. And I just think if we don't take this one on, what we are going to see is the dismantling of a social security system that took an awful lot of people, an awful lot of decades to fight for and build, and is, and I'll finish where I started, a cornerstone of a democratic, decent and fair society. Thank you.